Hello and welcome to a Commander Crucible Deck Tech. This episode, I'm joined by my good friend and creator of the deck list we're looking at today, Randy Robicheski.
Hey guys, good to be here. Thanks for having me on, Jared.
In this episode, we'll be going over a commander that many of you may have overlooked in the past, possibly already looked at and judged as a never-build commander, and maybe you thought he was too slow, too much to cast, maybe no real theme, but I'm here to tell you to forget everything you thought you knew about the one and only Dralnu Lich Lord. Let me tell you, as someone who's faced this menace before, it is definitely a powerhouse. I can say that this deck has been under construction for a while, but I think Randy's pretty confident in his current list. You can locate the link in the description if you want to view Dralnu Lich Lord on tappedout.net. So now, let's look at some backstory on our commander before we dive into the deck that's built around him. Dralnu's description says that Dralnu had been a warrior in life. He fell in battle and was reanimated by an Urborgian necromancer. Dralnu retained an unusual level of awareness and intelligence as a zombie, and became an apprentice to the Lich that reanimated him. Over time, Dralnu learned everything he could from his master, and then killed her to take control of her undead legions. Dralnu eventually tried to take control of more than just zombies, and was executed for his crimes, and his undead legions were cut down to be no more. In order to ensure that Dralnu would not be reborn, they made sure to destroy all his necromantic equipment and slaughter his undead minions. So there you have it, where our Lich Lord commander comes from and a little bit about his backstory. So let's get into his physical card. Dralnu is a 3/3 zombie lord from the Time Spiral set, and says if damage would be dealt to Dralnu, sacrifice that many permanents instead. And tap Dralnu, target instant or sorcery in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its converted mana cost as you play it. So right away, the thing that jumps out to me is that can't take damage, and if Dralnu is dealt damage, you have to sacrifice that many permanents. That's instantly scary right off the bat. I mean, I don't want to come against a red burn player and have Blasphemous Act resolve and have to sacrifice 13 permanents. Dralnu even has a pseudo indestructible as he can't take damage, but instead you have to sacrifice that many permanents based on how much damage is dealt to him. Randy, can you tell us a way that you usually get around this sacrifice permanents clause?
Yeah, Jared, I definitely agree with you there. His sacrifice clause is probably the most deterring factor about the card. A lot of players look at that and they go, yeah, there's no way I'm going to play this card. It's too risky. He can't block. He can barely ever attack. If he takes damage, I'll basically lose the game. That's most of the time that's the comment that I hear when people see me pull him out of my deck box. However, there are multiple different ways to play around this, and in order to play this deck effectively, you have to be patient and you have to be smart about when you're putting Dralnu on the field. I have a lot of cards in this deck that allow you to sacrifice creatures at instant speed for mana, for scrying, and I'll get into more of these cards in detail later on in the video. But I also run a lot of counter spells. I'll run a lot of kill spells, which I primarily use against my opponents, but if it is a last-ditch effort, I will not hesitate to destroy Dralnu. But yeah, there's multiple different ways. Most of the cards that I have in the deck that allow me to do this are multi-purpose. They're not just there to sacrifice Dralnu in case something happens. They often add some kind of value to sacrificing the creature. That way I'm not wasting card slots on a specific thing. You know, I'm having card slots that allow me to do multiple things with multiple different cards, overlapping synergy. That way the deck's a little bit more broad in how it can perform, and it is much more tuned to react to certain situations.
So even though that first ability might not be very optimal for commander players, it does sound pretty solid for a Lich Lord that can't die, and pretty much makes sense for him to have this ability. But let's move on and let's look at his second ability. So this is probably the ability where you might have given Dralnu a second look, but just got too hung up on the first ability. Dralnu is able to tap and give a target instant or sorcery flashback where the cost is equal to its converted mana cost. And obviously the card Paradox Engine comes right to my mind when thinking of this commander, and just getting a way to tap Dralnu and then untap him multiple times in a way to get extreme value off of your graveyard. So the question that I have for you, Randy, is when you cast Dralnu and you cast him early, Are you looking to cast the little things that are in your graveyard, or do you usually wait until the late game to build up your graveyard and have multiple things to choose from, and then try and get your engine going, tapping and untapping Dralnu?
I'll be honest with you, Jared. Most of my little spells are counter spells or kill spells. I have a couple tutors in here. If I really need to get something going, if I see something on someone's board that needs to be dealt with, that might be merit enough to get Dralnu down as early as possible. But unless I've got a way to protect him, a way to sacrifice him, or a way to get rid of him in case someone tries to burn him, or or if there's nothing in my graveyard, he'll probably stay up in the command zone.
Probably a smart idea to keep him up there if you don't have any fuel in the graveyard. But now that we've looked about Dralnu's strengths and why and how you use him, we need to look at the flip side of the coin and look at his weaknesses. So obviously there's the sacking permanence, which is most likely his biggest downside about our boy Dralnu here, is the fact that he's 5 CMC, being 3 colorless, a blue, and a black. So has Dralnu being 5 mana ever been a real big problem for you, Randy?
I'll be honest with you, yes and no. I think 5 mana is appropriate, considering his ability. 4 might put him a little up there in terms of competitiveness. 6 would be too much to consider him as a commander. 5 is kind of that sweet spot, with mana rocks like Soul Ring and Thought Vessel and Coalition Relic. It's not hard to get him out earlier than turn 5, but you're not really trying to get Dralnu out earlier than turn 5 with this specific deck. A lot of combo decks really do want to get him out as fast as possible so they can start churning their graveyards to generate the value they need to combo out, but this deck is built to mess with your opponents. I want to tell you that the majority of the cards in this deck do something to your opponent's field, creatures, artifacts, etc. That being said, it's not really necessary to get him out early unless one of your opponents is getting to that point where they're already ready to combo out, and you need to get Dralnu into play so that you have more access to counter spells and kill spells and ways to prevent them from winning the game all in one turn.
So you're saying that getting your artifacts and lands out is obviously a must with any deck that's not green, and just then focusing on not necessarily getting Dralnu out as fast as possible, but maybe holding your mana up to seem like you're going to do something, and then casting Dralnu on turn 5 is definitely acceptable with this commander.
I would agree, yeah. Your game's going to start more or less like this. You're going to have your full hand of 7. Hopefully you kept a good hand. You've got some artifact mana rocks in there, which I'll cover some of what I've got in my deck there in that category later. You've got some kind of action regarding counter spells, kill spells, and you got your lands. This deck has creatures in it, but most of those creatures are clones or they're creatures that generate value by themselves. So that being said, it's everything that you're going to be recasting with Dralnu first has to be cast from your hand. Hopefully, this deck doesn't want to discard its cards. You want to cast it and then recast it to amplify the value of those instants and sorceries.
So another big thing about Dralnu that we've already gone over with his tapping and untapping to activate that ability to draw, to cast your instance from the grave, is obviously summoning sickness. So casting Dralnu, obviously for 5 mana, maybe on turn 5 like we talked about earlier, and then leaving him unprotected, just kind of letting him sit on the field for an entire turn around the table doesn't seem like the best of strategies. What's your go-to plan when casting Dralnu and letting him sit?
So there are a couple things in this category that I want to cover. If you're going to cast Dralnu, your number one concern is, can I get him out of play if something horrible happens? His first ability is so detrimental if someone hurts him, to the point where if it happens, you will more than likely be completely out of the game by the end of the resolution of whatever happens. Blasphemous Act comes to mind. Any kind of bolt spell that deals damage cards that say target creature fights another target creature, or you may choose how creatures block this turn. If somebody tries to take your turn for you, and they have, alright, so in that instance, Emrakul, the Promised End, she's a very popular card. In my play group, if someone were to take my turn, and I have Dralnu in play, they can take my turn and have Dralnu swing at them and block with Emrakul. And then they will choose how to sacrifice my permanents. These are things that you have to avoid at all costs. If this happens, you will lose the game. I've luckily never had it happen to me. I would rather not cast Dralnu for the whole game than run into that, because it is quite embarrassing. So, a couple things here can help you avoid this. If you're going to cast it, make sure you have either a way to sacrifice it, counter spells in your hand, or a way to give him Shroud or Haste. I have a couple artifacts in my deck that do this. The obvious Swiftfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves will give him Hexproof and Haste, which is very important with Dralnu being able to tap and give those instants and sorceries flashback. I've got plenty of counter spells in the deck that serve the dual purpose of protecting Dralnu or stopping my opponent's game-ending spells. Use them mostly for the latter. I've never really had to counter a burn spell. I would rather have a card like Ashnod's Altar in play, or Viscera Seer, because people can respond to your counter spells with other burn spells. And if you have a card like Ashnod's Altar in play, you can activate its ability to sacrifice Dralnu. They go to respond to that. You can respond by activating the ability again, which means that as long as Ashnod's Altar is in play, Dralnu is constantly safe. No one will ever touch him. Yeah, you'll have to recast him, but it's not worth losing those permanents.
Right, I wouldn't want to lose those permanents either if I were playing Dralnu. And I can tell everyone that in my personal standpoint, this deck has won many games, but it's also lost its fair share of games as well. But now let's take time to dive into the other 99 cards that surround Dralnu. So first off, we'll start with the instants. Right here on Tapped Out, it says that there are 22 instants in this Dralnu deck, and we're going to attempt to break them down in groups, rather than breaking them down one at a time. So our first group is going to be the obvious counterspells. It says here, Arcane Denial, Counterspell, Cryptic Command, Force of Will, Insidious Will, Mana Drain, Pact of Negation, and Swan Song, making 8 in total. Some of these counterspells obviously have secondary abilities like Insidious Will and Cryptic Command, which are, personally for me, a recommendation for any blue deck. It's always great when you can have a counterspell doubled up onto something else, so that way you can choose, I need the counterspell in this situation, or I need to tap all the creatures, or I need to draw the card with Cryptic Command, per se. And I personally love those.
Yeah, I agree. I love dual purpose cards, and in this case, quad purpose cards. It's it takes your deck from low level to a high level very quickly, being able to react to certain situations, because we are playing a format where you're playing against 3 other opponents. They're all doing different things, and they're all doing very specific different things. You might have a token deck in one corner, you might have a control guy in the other corner, and you might have a combo guy across from you. And if you've got a card like Cryptic Command or Insidious Will in your hand, you have options. Is it best to counter the spell? Should I copy that Torment to Hellfire so mine resolves first? Do I need to tap down the token army? These multi-purpose counter spells are incredibly important. They're, not cheap to cast. They're 4, but, in a control deck, that's a little expensive. But
it is a little expensive, but 4 mana to Cryptic Command, which is arguably, in some players' minds, one of the best blue spells in the game. 4 mana to tap down your opponent's entire field. Is that, in my opinion, that's definitely worth it. Even though it is constricted, being 3 blue, it's definitely worth it.
Yep, I agree. Moving on to a couple of the other counter spells in here. If someone out there is looking to build this deck, the Force of Will is not going to break the back of this deck at all. I got this card a long time ago. It's one of my little prize cards. And I love the idea of it being free to cast, because when you are playing against that control or a combo player, and they think that they've got you beat, you can bluff them into leaving no backup plan available to them, just throwing themselves out there to try and win. But it's definitely not a card you need in the deck. There's the other free counterspell in here, Pact Negation, much, much cheaper than Force of Will, $10 versus $75. Still free. Yes, you have to pay 5 at the beginning of your next upkeep, but I definitely think that's worth it in a case where someone just tried to win the game and you stopped them dead in their tracks.
Then you can almost say to the table that you're the hero. You're the one who used your resources to stop the combo player. And like you said earlier, if you're using Dralnu, this deck is meant to control everyone and counter and steal. Maybe this is a way where you can counter the big game-ending spell and then tell everyone that you're the hero. So that might actually end up saving you in the long run.
Absolutely. It's against combo players, you look like the hero, but when you're standing at a table full of aggro decks and guys that you've played with for a long time, it can definitely shift over to you being the villain very quickly.
And as I'm looking at your list here, as we went over before, you have 8 counter spells. Why not more? In a deck that seems like it wants to sling from the graveyard after main casting it, most more competitive lists usually, I would assume, have 10 to 12 counter spells in the deck. Why did you decide to only go with 8?
I don't want to tell you that it's because I ran out of room, because it's not. My play group is not combo built, and Dralnu just kind of fell right into that slot because I love getting value out of these instants and sorceries, and 8 counter spells with Dralnu in play can easily become 16 counter spells. Get him haste, get him into play after you've casted Lightning Greaves. If you casted Mana Drain, that's a great counter spell in this deck. Definitely pricey, but if you counter, a 5 mana spell, a 6 mana spell, you're setting yourself up to practically cast Dralnu and even a card like Ashnod's Altar or the Greaves, or even hold mana up for a counter spell on your next turn, which, that card is definitely a multi-purpose card there. It's one of the more expensive cards, but this deck was born in an era of combo decks. I'm pretty sure you had one of those combo decks, Jared. Do you want to?
I definitely did.
That one for us?
I had a mono blue Jace Vryn's Prodigy combo deck, as mono blue goes, and that was probably our group's first combo-centric deck, and it was getting to the point where I was setting up the win on turn 3, and I would easily have it turn 4 or 5 if I wanted to give my opponents a couple chances to try and stop my combo. And that is when Dralnu started to rear his head in, and I
remember those days.
I do remember those as well, and Dralnu was definitely a sight to behold, and my mono blue Jace Vryn's deck definitely came apart after that, as we quickly found out that when 4 people are trying to combo off, or 3 people are trying to combo off, and one person's trying to stop them, it is not a lot of fun. So again, like we've stated before, we have nothing. There's nothing wrong with combos. We don't have a big problem with combos. We just choose not to focus on them and not to try and win that way, to keep the game a little bit more lighthearted. We're definitely more casual, but if you love combos, that's all right. We love you too.
I agree. It's before you go on, Jared, I just wanted to say one last thing regarding that. It's a lot of people out there play competitive EDH. There's gameplay videos out there of people, who have all the moxes who are just trying to infinite real quick. A lot of people really enjoy that. I think that our play group specifically is a very imaginative one. We love the lore of Magic the Gathering. We love picking commanders that we can style up, and decks that we can get a lot of flavor going in. Get cards in the deck that aren't necessarily the most potent, but are there because it's definitely something that creature would do. Dralnu is a Lich Lord sorcerer, and you want cards in the deck that are right up his alley of what the character himself would be doing. And in our play group, you've got the combo guy who just gets cards for their pure value. It was just something we didn't enjoy. So, again, no hard feelings against the combo players, but I am coming after you if you are a combo
and
player, just saying.
Maybe if you build this Dralnu list, you will be able to say that to any comboers at your LGS or in your play group. So maybe if you have a friend who's getting on your nerves and they're saying that they're the best because their deck combo so early, maybe Dralnu is the deck for you. So now let's move on to the other instant category that we have set up, which would be instant speed removal. And in this category, we have Capsize, Cyclonic Rift, Go for the Throat, Hero's Downfall, Pongify, Rapid Hybridization, and Reality Shift. Honestly, all really good, solid inclusions for this deck. There are 7 in total. There's Cyclonic Rift, which is obvious, and Capsize, which you can buy back and cast from the graveyard. And there's only 7. Care to tell us why only 7 instant speed removal spells?
Yeah, it's a pretty solid number. You gotta leave room for creatures, you gotta leave room for mana rocks and counter spells. And honestly, I would like to personally lump counter spells and instant speed removal almost into the same category, because the counter spell is effectively removing a threat. The kill spells, however, are a little bit different, as in it all has to do with timing. I can, in EDH, not have to worry about the Geshath deck across the table, who has a gigantic 7/6 dino that is going to trigger upon combat damage coming at me if I have a kill spell up. If I don't want that guy to hit me, and I have Go for the Throat in my hand, I'm going to look at that player and I'm going to say, if you attack me with that, I am going to kill your commander. This is an effective way to politic. It is threatening, and a lot of players don't like it. And if they're going to come at you anyway, then go ahead and fire it off, because I'm hoping you'll be able to recast that Go for the Throat later. But I definitely think that these cards are a lot more political in their timing, because a counterspell must be cast at the exact time the card is being cast, versus a kill spell, which can be held until the last minute, and you can even threaten your opponents into attacking your other opponents.
All solid inclusions again for instant speed removal, and it was a pretty good point lumping the counter spells and the instant speed removal together, but also reminding everyone that they definitely should be used at different times. There's a different mindset when thinking about instant speed removal and counter spells. But now, what you said earlier, that Dralnu is trying to take control of your opponent's thing, we'll move on to instant speed control spells. So you have Commandeer, Aether Snatch, and Reigns of Power.
Yep, these cards are ones you're going to be holding on to and using at the most crucial points of the game. Let's say somebody is putting down a gigantic creature and you have Aether Snatch in your hand.
So just to remind everyone, Aether Snatch is a 6 mana instant for blue. Gain control of target spell. You may choose new targets for that spell. So you have to cast Aether Snatch. You're taking a spell. So as the spell is on the stack, it is obviously not resolved yet.
Yep, and if that spell becomes a permanent, it enters the battlefield under your control. You want to be very careful on how you use these cards. It's easy to waste them, it's easy to use them at the wrong moments, and this deck is designed for timing to basically be the whole crux of what makes the deck so powerful. Don't cast that Aether Snatch on something stupid. If they're putting down a Gilded Lotus for mana, if they're putting down something, if you're sitting fine, hold on to it. Just wait. Draw some cards. As long as they can't kill you right then and there, keep it in your hand. Don't take something unless it's, I'm going to Aether Snatch an Eagle Bolas. I'm going to Aether Snatch a Avenger of Zendikar. Unless I have some other kind of control spell in my hand, or kill spell even. If you can get rid of the card and destroy it, it's probably preferable for you to do that if the card's not backbreaking. Save these cards for stealing the backbreaking spells.
That is a great way to put it, and a lot of these spells are higher CMC, so you're probably not going to see them until later anyway, when the big game-ending stuff does start coming out. So definitely save these spells. Don't try, like Randy said, don't try and cast them on the Thran Dynamos or anything like that. Now our last category of instant spells are, I've just titled Other. And in the other category, we have spells like Limdol's Vault, Mystical Tutor, Memory Plunder, and Sudden Spoiling. And something that jumps out to me right away when I look at this other category, no Vampiric Tutor. Why is that?
Jared, I'm going to be straight with you. I kind of want to put that card in this deck. This deck does not have a lot of tutors in it, because in my playgroup, I got a lot of complaints about this deck being too good, and getting, this deck was annoying, and that, I went out to a shop near me once, and I played this deck, and I Torment a Hailfired for like 60 towards the end of the game, and I think I tutored once, and my opponent's first comment after the game was, yeah, that deck's incredibly competitive. And I asked him why, and he said, you're drawing tons of cards, I couldn't resolve a single thing, and you were tutoring all the time. And I looked at him and I said, I think I only tutored twice, and it was with the same spell. I'm pretty sure it was Mystical Tutor. And he said, well, yeah, but I mean, that deck's probably got like 4 or 5 tutors in it, right? I looked at him and I said, no, it's got 1 tutor. And I think he brought he enlightened me a little bit. Adding more tutors to this deck would make it a lot more impressive, a lot more powerful. So if that's something you want to do, Vampiric Tutor, Demonic Tutor, even if you afford it, Imperial Seal, cards like those, they will bring this deck a lot higher in power. Being able to go find specific creatures is not something I can do with this deck currently, but I feel like if I did, if I was able to do that, this deck's power level would go up exponentially.
So there you have it. I guess that's why there's not a lot of tutors in the deck. As we stated before, we're not too competitive. We like to keep things a little more casual. And as Randy said, if you want to include more tutors, feel free. But that is just why they're not included in this list. We do know that they exist, and we do know that they're very powerful, but that's just why they're not here. So another instant that I want to bring up, and it's an instant that I've only recently started using, but I've known about, and it is incredibly powerful, especially being only 2 mana, being a blue and a black, is Limdol's Vault. Limdol's Vault says, look at the top 5 cards of your library as many times as you choose. You may pay 1 life and put those cards on the bottom of your library in any order. Then, look at the top 5 cards of your library again. Then shuffle your library and put the last 5 cards you looked at on the top in any order this way. So again, it's causing you to dig, you get shocked for 1 each time you do it, but you pay 1 life to look at 5 cards, you put them back on the top in any order. This card, especially being such a low cost at instant speed, you could grab anything. You could grab your big game-ending creature. You could grab a counterspell when you need it. You could grab, if you're running combos, you could grab that last piece of that combo that you need by digging with it for Limdol's Vault.
Yeah, I definitely don't like seeing my opponents resolve this card. Limdol's Vault, it stacks the top 5. Man, if this card were available for Narset, it would be absolutely bonkers. But it's in this particular deck, this is the one way I can find any card I need. I have a couple land cards in here that are very important to the strategy. I have some creatures that I do like to get down. A few enchantments that I wouldn't mind getting out on turn 3, such as Ristic Study. And turn 4, No Mercy would be very, very beneficial for the deck. And then it can grab artifacts. And not only are you stacking the top card, you're stacking the next 4 in the best way that you see fit at the cost of 1 life. Definitely very useful in Commander. One other card I wanted to cover, though, before we move on to our next topic, is Sudden Spoiling. Very, very underrated in my opinion.
So I'll remind everyone what Sudden Spoiling does and is. So it's an instant, obviously. It's 1 mana of any color and 2 black. So in it has Split Second. Split Second says, as long as this spell is on the stack, players cannot cast spells or activate abilities if they are not mana abilities. When this spell resolves until end of turn, creatures target player controls lose all abilities and have a base power of toughness 0-2.
Yep, that first part is definitely the reason why I love it so much. Split Second, basically saying that this card cannot be stopped no matter what. I am sure that most of the viewers know and have heard about Laboratory Maniac. It's one of the most popular infinite win conditions. I'm pretty sure it's the key piece to Doomsday actually winning with that deck. You know, there's so many mono blue decks, even green blue, anything with blue that's trying to draw cards could potentially be running this card. And this card, Split Second, will turn that Laboratory Maniac into a 0-2 with no abilities. Now this is where the timing comes in with this card. I like to talk about the specific scenario because it's so prevalent with the meta and EDH nowadays, but let's say they're about to draw their last card out of their library. They have some kind of a zombie combo going where, you know, the card is zombie, tap a wizard you control to draw a card. Many ways to go infinite with that. Basically, you're getting down to that last card. They activate the trigger to draw the last card library. Then they activate it again to draw a card where there is no card, which would effectively win them the game. However, you're going to cast Split Second you're going to cast Sudden Spoiling with Split Second in response to that final draw, turning their Laboratory Maniac into a 0-2 with no abilities. They're going to draw that, or going to go draw that card. They're not going to get that card. They're going to die because Laboratory Maniac isn't there to help them win the game. They've effectively comboed themselves to death because of your 3 mana instant speed black spell. Nothing's more satisfying. They think they've got it in the bag, and you just kind of wave to them goodbye. They got to get up, be done. So it's personally one of my favorite cards. Would highly recommend playing it in any black deck, really, because it is multi-purpose. It doesn't just hit Laboratory Maniac. It hits a fat board state of creatures coming at you.
Right, I was just going to bring up the fact. I was just going to bring up the fact that the token player, the elf player, as you mentioned before, maybe a Gishath player, they have a giant army, and they're going to swing at the puny Dimir player. Oh, you don't have anything, you just have Dralnu, and you're obviously not going to block with him. I'm going to swing out at you for 80. Well, guess what? Sudden Spoiling, Split Second, have fun not responding to that. You have a bunch of 0-2s. And, you know, maybe you have a few zombie tokens, maybe created through Army of the Damned, and you block and kill all their good stuff while they're 0-2s.
Yep. And along with this card, it pairs, it's similar to the card Polymorph's Jest, but it's just so much better with Split Second and the fact that the creatures become 0-2s. So even if they made infinite creatures, even if it was Breya's infinite attack with Thopters, they're all 0-2s now.
Exactly.
And Breya can't make more, so it's effectively completely stopping them in their tracks.
Also, there you have it. Sudden Spoiling. Great card. Who knew it? But now let's move on to our next category, being sorceries. Now, the first one that I have set up here is board wipe and removal sorceries. We have Curse of the Swine, Damnation, Decree of Pain, and Toxic Deluge. 4 board wipes. Why only 4? Not 5, not 3.
4 is a good number. You could go 5, you could go 3. Board wipes really do slow games down. In this case, a control deck really does want the game to be slower. It does want to make it to the end game. But I did pick these board wipes specifically to deal with multiple different situations. So you have your classic Damnation, just flat out destroys all creatures that can't be regenerated. The other 3 specifically take out creatures that have abilities that would otherwise nullify Damnation. For instance, Curse of the Swine deals with indestructible creatures. You need a way to get rid of those. Along with Curse of the Swine, I have Toxic Deluge. He gets rid of indestructible creatures as well. Those things are very difficult to deal with if you can't counterspell them or kill them, or if there is a full board of indestructible creatures. You need a way to get rid of these guys. So those 2 will cover that. And then finally we got Decree of Pain. I can't tell you how many times I've won a game off of this card. You wouldn't think it's as powerful, being so much mana. Drawing this card in your first hand or in your opening hand is very, very, very disheartening.
Well, in Decree of Pain obviously has these secondary abilities that we were referring to with spells like Cryptic Command. where Decree of Pain says you destroy all creatures, they can't be regenerated, and then you draw a card for each creature that's destroyed that way. So right there, you're already putting yourself ahead of your opponents by drawing the cards that they might have lost that were on the battlefield. You're refilling your hand. Or you can then choose to cycle the card, where you're going to pay 3 colorless, black, black, to discard Decree of Pain, and then draw a card again. A little bit of card advantage. And then when you cycle Decree of Pain, all creatures on the battlefield get -2/-2 until end of turn. And that goes with what you were saying about trying to get around indestructible.
Yep, it's a small -2/-2, but that ability has come in handy. Your opponents can't counterspell something that you're cycling. They have to stifle that, I think. The card draw from this card is insane. You're playing Commander, you're going to probably draw more than 7-8 cards with this card if you're casting at the right time, which is more than enough to make it worth casting it for 8 mana, in my opinion.
So after we look at the board wipe and removal section of sorceries, we'll move on to control. And here you have Blatant Thievery, Bribery, and Praetor's Grasp. And just hearing those, and if you know what they are, you'll definitely know that any good control player that wants to take things from his opponents, his or her opponents, is going to want these cards. Blatant Thievery is definitely the highest cost of them, being 4 colorless, blue, blue, blue. At sorcery speed, you're going to take it control. You gain control of target permanent that every player controls. And then you move on to Bribery, which is just probably one of the best steal spells in blue. You literally just search an opponent's library, take a creature, and put it straight onto your battlefield. So you can grab all the Vorinclexes, all the Emrakuls, anything that you really need. And Praetor's Grasp, it's just 3 mana, and you search a library just like Bribery, then you exile a card face down, and as long as that remains exiled, you may look at that card and play that card as long as it remains exiled.
Yep, that is one of my combo killer cards. You got a lot of guys that dedicate their decks to one combo. I'm not surprised that many people nowadays are building decks that can combo in multiple ways, but you got Doomsday decks out there, and they want to go find Doomsday, they want to go find Lab Maniac. This is a card that lets you go get it first. You get to search the library for it, put it in exile, and unless you cast it, it's gone. One card to do this, you really only, this deck's full of all sorts of cards. You don't want to stack certain categories full, except for obviously your board manipulation, counterspells and board wipes, but Praetor's Grasp is definitely useful there, but it also goes and grabs artifacts that you can cast, or any spell that's in the same colors that you have. I've grabbed Soul Ring, I've grabbed Thranduil, Gilded Lotus, I've grabbed Paradox Engine from my enemy's deck. These artifacts are colorless, so I can definitely cast them. And going on to Bribery, I've had a fat board state and go on and grab Someone's Greater of Behemoth. It is a key card. You can go and grab so many different creatures, and because you're playing against 3 opponents, you have so many options. It just amplifies the power, exactly like with Blatant Thievery. This card would absolutely be horrible in 1v1 Commander. 7 mana to take permanent, no thank you. But in a 4-player game, which is what I play most of the time, and what most Commander players play most of the time, you're going to be stealing 1 from each opponent. And that's 3 permanents for 7 mana. And these could be huge permanents, or they could be small combo pieces. It's definitely up to what you decide.
So after we look at our control category, there's the other category in sorceries, being Army of the Damned, Reanimate, Rite of Replication, and Torment of Hailfire. So Army of the Damned, as I mentioned earlier, is a large sorcery, being 5 colorless, black, black, black. And it just says, put 13 2/2 black zombie creature tokens onto the battlefield tapped. With a flashback cost, just like what Dralnu gives flashback, this card just has flashback on it anyway, so if you don't have Dralnu, feel free to cast it. Of 7 colorless, black, black, black. You have Reanimate, The classic 1-mana black sorcery, just put target creature from a graveyard onto play and lose life equal to its converted mana cost. Rite of Replication, obviously with that big kicker of 5, creating a token, putting that token onto the battlefield that's a copy of target creature, and if Rite of Replication is kicked, put 5 of those tokens on the battlefield instead. Definitely right there. Huge spell, way to end the game. And lastly, a card that you've mentioned quite a bit, Torment of Hailfire, being X black black. Repeat the following process X times. Each opponent loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. And Torment of Hailfire, not just in our play group, but in others that we've played in as well, I think this card sees a lot of play. It's a great mono black card that just does so many things. If you dump a lot of mana into it, even if you're not creating infinite mana, it still has a way to cripple your opponents.
I agree. With Paradox Engine in this deck and Dralnu's ability of acquiring to just tap, and the amount of mana rocks I have in here, I think I don't even remember the number. I have 16 artifacts in this deck, and most of them are mana rocks. Lots of ways to fire your whole graveyard off, your whole hand out, and then also cast your hand out of your graveyard after you've cast it with Dralnu in play. I have a lot of instants and sorceries in here that are very cheap to cast, and the way that works is I will tap, let's say I have Gilded Lotus, Soul Ring, and a Signet in play. Not unheard of, or it could be any other mana rocks that make colored mana or colorless mana. I tap all of those to make 3 from Gilded Lotus, 2 from Soul Ring, and 1 from the Signet to make 6 mana and cast a kill spell, untapping them. I'll have 4 mana left over, and that spell will go to my graveyard. If I have Dralnu in play, I can tap Dralnu to give that spell flashback, tap all those mana rocks again to generate another 6, putting me up to 10, to recast the kill spell, which will trigger Paradox Engine and untap my mana rocks and Dralnu at the same time, leaving me with 8 left over. I can do this repeatedly with cards in my hand and then casting them again from my graveyard as long as I can make more mana than I'm spending. If Torment of Hailfire is in my hand and nobody's able to counter it, I can effectively make enough mana to make Torment of Hailfire 40 to 50 being the X cost, and that will just instantaneously win the game right there. It's not infinite, but it is very, very, very powerful synergy. And it's only really gotten that high because I can recast the cards that I'm casting from my hand with Dralnu, because he's untapping due to Paradox's ability. Moving forward to the other cards in the deck, though, that being one of the major win cons, these other 2 cards in here are my other 2 big win cons. Army of the Damned, putting 13 2/2 black zombie creature tokens into play is absolutely crazy, especially after you board wipe or something. You want to cast it again at the right time. Don't put those zombies into play if somebody else has a ton of creatures into play and you have a board wipe in your hand. You want to clear the field first, and then you want to go and you want to build a board state right after you've cleared the battlefield. And then moving on to Rite of Replication, again, if you're kicking that card, it's going to win you the game as long as you're targeting the right creature. I want to target Avenger of Zendikar. I want to target a Uvara Hellkite. Anything that's just absolutely huge. Just hold on to that card. If you need to cast it early, make sure you're using your correct threat assessment and not being silly with the card. But if you can hold on to it till the end of the game, this card can easily win you the entire match.
Very well said. I honestly have no arguments there. I've definitely, seen you cast every single one of those with this Dralnu deck. And as you said, if they're not countered, if they're not controlled, if you don't have a board wipe, if you don't have a way to recover from any of these, definitely a way for this Dralnu deck to end the game. Whereas you'd look at this and say, 10 creatures doesn't really seem like it might have enough ways to end. Or, you have quite a bit of instants and sorceries. I don't really see how you're going to withstand my mono green elf. But that right there just sounds like the way that you're going to pop off Dralnu when no one expects it, and to really either put the game in your hands to take it in the next few turns or to just win right there.
Agreed.
So after looking at these sorceries, we'll move on to our next category. Creatures.
So the first creature I want to talk about here very quickly is Viscera Seer. Again, this deck needs ways to sacrifice Dralnu quickly. His sole purpose for being in this deck is to sacrifice Dralnu. He has the added benefit of if I've stolen something from somebody and they try to take it back, I can sacrifice it in response so that they don't get it back. But being able to sacrifice Dralnu at instant speed, to get him off the field is just incredibly important. Moving forward, I have a lot of clones. Stunt Double, Phyrexian Metamorph, Evil Twin, Clever Impersonator. This deck is a deck that's playing with your opponent's resources. You are playing you are responding to most of what your opponents are doing, and you are building off of what your opponents have in their own decks. Whether you're stealing it from them or you're cloning it, which actually adds a ton of versatility to this deck, and it makes every single game different because you are going to play based off of what your opponents are playing. And if you're playing against different opponents every week, you're going to be playing different creatures every week as well because you're running clones and steal spells. So one of the things I admire about the deck is that it never feels like it's just the same old. It's definitely, you get to experience a lot of what your opponents are doing on their board because you're copying it. Moving forward, there are 4 big creatures in this deck that I have in here simply because I think they're awesome, and then a couple that are just absolute value by themselves. I'll start with Consecrated Sphinx. A lot of people would argue that if your deck's blue, you want to run this card. Jared, I remember you had this card in at least 2 or 3 of your decks at the time. I know how much you love blue. Just being able to draw cards in Commander like that.
Any blue deck, as you just said, in my opinion, any blue deck almost needs a Consecrated Sphinx. Unless you're doing creatureless, Consecrated Sphinx is just pure and utter value. And on the same level, if someone else plays a Consecrated Sphinx and your first priority isn't to kill it or to try and convince someone else to kill it, there's something wrong there. If Consecrated Sphinx resolves on someone else's board state, you better be trying to get that out.
Yep, it's so much card draw, and because you're playing against multiple opponents, it gets way out of hand way fast. So moving forward, my next big value creature is Grave Titan. Notice that these 2 creatures I just covered, the Sphinx and the Titan, are both not legendary. This directly synergizes with the clone spells I have in the deck, and even Rite of Replication on my own creatures. Being able to make so many copies of this card, even just 2 copies of this card on your battlefield, is going to put you over the top. Consecrated Sphinx drawing your cards, and then Grave Titan, who, when he enters the battlefield or attacks, makes you black zombie tokens. It's going to be overwhelming for your opponents. He is an engine alone, let alone all the clones you could potentially have to come into play as a copy of him. He will definitely build you a board state all by himself. And then the last couple creatures I have in here, the last couple creatures I have are Gilded Drake and Hostage Taker. Gilded Drake is exactly what this deck does. It steals creatures. This card costs 2 mana, and in Commander, where people are playing the biggest, dumbest creatures you could possibly think of, when they have commanders that are incredibly important to their deck strategy, you've got this 2 mana little Drake that you can just cast without even feeling like you wasted mana on your turn just to steal it right to your board. So much value for so little mana on a creature card is extremely valuable. Being able to bounce that back to your hand with a card like Capsize or Cryptic Command allows you to recast it over and over again. Casting Rite of Replication, targeting Gilded Drake, you get to steal something else. Cloning the Gilded Drake lets you steal something else. That card gets way out of hand. I know that it's a lot more valuable in cards like Brago, or in decks like Brago, or anything that can blink it, but this deck definitely uses it just as well. And then the last creature, Jared, this is probably one of your favorite creatures as well, is Hostage Taker. I definitely remember stealing a piece of your combo with this guy, or I should say gal, in one of our earlier games when you had first built Jace. You care to explain?
Well, just looking at Hostage Taker, it's a newer card from Ixalan. It's 2 colorless, blue-black, so it fits perfectly into this Dimir build. And it says, when Hostage Taker enters the battlefield, exile target artifact or creature until Hostage Taker leaves the battlefield. You may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were any type to cast that spell. So, right away when you cast Hostage Taker for low 4 mana, so it's not too high, especially for EDH, you're going to cast Hostage Taker and you get to exile, like Randy said, the artifact or creature combo piece. It remains exiled. As long as it remains exiled, you may then cast that straight to your board. So being Paradox Engine, Thran Dynamo, Ashnod's Altar, you can then cast that for yourself. When Hostage Taker does leave the battlefield, if the card is still exiled, the card remains exiled until Hostage Taker leaves, so you're going to want to try and cast that as soon as you can to deny that resource from your opponent. I just recently started using Hostage Taker, like Randy said, and it is definitely great. I would recommend it for any deck that can use it. I probably would. Being only 4 mana, you're not really caring about its power and toughness, but you're wanting the person to tap out for that Gilded Lotus, and then it gets to you and you cast Hostage Taker and you take their Gilded Lotus, and they basically just went an entire turn just to cast something for you to take.
Yep, and I primarily use this card to steal artifacts. EDH is incredibly renowned for how many artifacts are so important to the format. You know, you've got Paradox Engine. You know, we've been talking about mana rocks like Golden Lotus and Thran Dynamo and Soul Ring. Just so many key cards in artifacts that, you know, bring decks to life. You can exile them. You know, if they're indestructible, you got their Darksteel Forge over there. You've got some kind of equipment like Sword of Feast and Famine. And then you can, as an added bonus, put that into play under your control. You know, Jared, I've often told you that the best form of removal is to steal something. Not only are you taking away a threat from their side of the board, but you are placing that threat on your side of the board at the same exact time. That is just so much value for one card right there. And in other cards too. You know, you've got cards like Gilded Drake. You know, you're removing a creature from their side of the board and you're putting it on your side of the board. Granted, you're giving them a 3/3 flyer, but I would hope that whatever you're stealing is more powerful than that. So effective. It's underwhelming, or not underwhelming, it is undervalued by a lot of players out there, and I think it takes a lot of people by surprise.
I would definitely agree with that, and especially the statement where if you're trading your 2/2 flying Drake, you might want to be stealing something way stronger than just the 2/2 flyer that you're going to be giving away. And there you have it.
Burst your bubble, my friend, but it is a 3/3 flyer.
Well, the 3/3 flyer, then you might want to watch out because that 3/3 flyer might come back to haunt you in the later game. But there you have it. The spell-slinging Dralnu deck does have some creatures in it. But let's move on to our next category, being enchantments. Now
There's only 4.
there are 4 enchantments in this deck. There are only 4, and you might say that that's either too high for a Dimir deck, but it's the classic blue enchantment that arguably any blue deck should run. Leyline of Anticipation, giving all your non-land permanents flash, No Mercy, Rhystic Study, and Treachery.
Yeah, a lot of these cards, people will tell you that they are not that powerful, that you don't need to run them, and they're right. These cards don't break your deck. They're not here to help you win the game. Treachery is probably next to Leyline of Anticipation, one of my more powerful ones here. Let's cover that real quick. Treachery is a 5-mana enchantment that says when it comes to play, you enchant a creature.
Let's also not forget that Treachery is 3 colorless, blue, and says when it comes into play, untap up to 5 lands. So you could untap lands that are not even the lands that you use to cast Treachery. If you have 2 blue sources open and you need black, you cast Treachery and you untap the black sources that you'll need.
Yep, incredibly powerful. Another card that Brago loves, however, it's just too good not to put into this deck. It fits right into the theme of stealing things from your opponents. And in a deck where you want to hold up counter spells and kill spells, being able to basically cast it for free is just so valuable. Leyline of Anticipation. Next to the other card that does the same exact thing, Veldekin Orrery for 4 mana as well, which is an artifact instead of an enchantment.
It also does get the
Leyline-
added benefit of saying, if Leyline of Anticipation is in your starting hand, you may begin the game with this card onto the battlefield. That is the added benefit, but the drawback is that it is restricted. It's more restricted being 2 colorless, blue, rather than just being 4 colorless. So you're going to need 2 sources of blue mana if it's not in your opening hand to play it.
Exactly, and any blue deck is going to want this card over Veldekin Orrery, or even both of them. But, Veldekin Orrery is much more playable in every deck that's out there because it is colorless, so it is technically better. However, if your deck is blue, I would recommend replacing Veldekin Orrery with Leyline of Anticipation, seeing as how you could just put it into play right away. And
that just saves you 4 mana, and that also starts you as the control player on the draw-go phase of the game. Rather than trying to set that up, get your mana rocks out, you're starting every turn from turn 1 as draw-go.
Yep. And in this deck particularly, Leyline is insanely powerful. Like I said before, most of my deck messes with its opponent's board states, and the timing is incredibly important when you do so. Being able to board wipe at instant speed, being able to cast a lot of your clones, or anything else at instant speed is just absolutely crazy. When it comes to messing with your opponent's board state, if you time it correctly, you want to wait until the very last second when they think that they've got it, when they used as much of their resources as possible, and then you get right in there and you basically get them right in the side. Nope, sorry, you thought you had this, but I definitely have the upper hand now. Your resources have been used. It's all a matter of timing. This card, as long as it stays in play from the beginning of the game, has always won me the game. I don't think I've lost a single game where I had this in my opening hand.
Leyline of Anticipation, you heard it here. Very powerful.
In regards to the other 2 enchantments I have in here, there's not much to say about Rhystic Study. It is fantastic multiplayer card draw. A lot of players hate it, but to each his own. Every deck needs to be able to draw cards. Playing this card early on will definitely help you keep your hand nice and full, as long as there are players that are trying to play quickly at the table. And if they're not, then you already got them playing slower than they wanted to, which is exactly what you want to do. And No Mercy, probably one of my favorite cards in Magic the Gathering, simply because of the idea behind it. Whenever a creature successfully deals damage to you, destroy it. An enchantment in black for 4 mana. I've always pictured this like a big force field you're putting over yourself. Basically, you're like, come on, throw that creature at me and it'll die. Obviously doesn't work with indestructible creatures. However, this card just has a sweet spot in my heart. Just, imagination-wise. Very cool, very powerful. Love playing it.
So, I guess there is a reason that this Spellslinger deck also comes with a few enchantments. But now let's move on to our last category, being artifacts. So this deck is obviously not green, so we're not going to find any green ramp spells here. But we do have ramp artifacts, being Ashnod's Altar, Commander Sphere, Dimir Signet, Balwar Stone, Gilded Lotus, Mana Vault, Sol Ring, Talisman of Dominance, Thought Vessel, and Thran Dynamo, making 10 mana-producing artifacts. Randy, care to tell us why 10? Why not more? Why not less?
Well, this deck is very hungry, and in control, you want to be able to accelerate your gameplay quickly. Playing land, go, against a lot of the decks that are out there, whether they be aggro or mid-range, isn't really very effective for a control deck. You want to be able to accelerate with them. You want to be able to keep up. There are some mana rocks that a lot of people out there would say should be in here, such as Hedron Archive or Mind Stone. Being able to draw cards late in the game when you have all that mana that you need. And I would not disagree with that. I would not argue that, as I used to have those cards in here, but have taken them out. Simply because it's I've got these other artifacts in here that they need to make colored mana. These artifacts serve the dual purpose of accelerating my gameplay, providing me with resources to cast my cards, and they work with Paradox Engine, which is one of my biggest win cons in the game. Being able to tap and untap my non-land permanents, aka my artifact rocks, to cast cards like Torment the Hailfire for massive amounts of mana is incredibly important for the deck. You need to be able to have colored mana to fire off your library the way Dralnu can. But regarding the artifacts, I do have a couple in here that are not mana rocks, and I'll cover those real quick. Jared, you mentioned Ashnod's Altar, and I know I've talked about this card all over the place. I don't think I need to say anything more about it. You just need to be able to sacrifice Dralnu.
Or other players' creatures. You take someone else's Vorinclex and they try and steal it back. You can then sacrifice Vorinclex to stop them from gaining control of it again and just sending it back to their graveyard. And with that, we'll move on with the other category in the artifacts, being Helm of Possession, Lightning Greaves, Paradox Engine, Sensei's Divining Top, and the Swiftfoot Boots. And as Randy has said before, I think something that is really highlighted in the deck is Paradox Engine.
Yeah, not much to say about Paradox Engine. I've talked this card up throughout most of this deck, and it directly synergizes with Dralnu himself. Whenever you cast a spell, untap all non-land permanents you control. With the potency of artifact mana rocks that I have in this deck, and Dralnu himself in the deck, and the amount of instants and sorceries that have been put into the deck to help support his ability, it's not difficult to resolve that card and then win the game, or have an incredibly powerful lock on the board with the access you have to your library or to your graveyard and then your hand after you've cast it. Regarding the other artifacts you've discussed, Helm of Possession is just a really, really cool card. Not necessarily a card that's going to win you the game often. However, being able to sacrifice a creature to gain control of another creature and not have to lose control of that creature as long as the helm remains tapped is pretty powerful. You can sacrifice Dralnu in response to someone trying to burn him. You can sacrifice a creature you've stolen. You can sacrifice a zombie token. And at the same time, you're taking control of something somebody has. Maybe they're Gisela, maybe they're Get Wrong Monster, anything that is just a value dimension on their side of the board. Get it out of there, get it over to your side, you'll be doing fine.
So after the artifact category, we'll move on to our official last one, I misspoke last time, is the lands category. There are 36 lands in this deck, and obviously your run-of-the-mill dual Dimir lands that you'll want to get for this deck include anyone you want, the ones that enter tap, that gain you 1 life, or the extremely good ones, the battle bond lands, anyone you want. But we're going to talk and highlight the utility and colorless lands. So in this deck, there is Encroaching Waste, Ghost Quarter, Wasteland, High Market, Inventor's Fair, Myriad Landscape, and Reliquary Tower.
Yep, a lot of these lands are utility lands. I'm hoping that most of the listener base and you yourself have noticed that most of them do one thing, and that is destroy non-basic lands. There is one land card that will completely cripple this deck's ability to steal things from their opponent, and it is Homeward Path. This card comes down, if you don't have a way to deal with it, that creature you stole, whatever it is you took from your opponent, they're just going to be able to get it right back. Anything you reanimated out of their graveyard, they'll get it right back. Anything you bribery them for, they'll get it right back. So having these cards in here that don't come into play tapped, because that is not what you want to be doing, is useful because they're there to make mana for you, and you're not sacrificing a ton of colored mana for these cards, but they will destroy Homeward Path, and they will be able to take out cards like Giga's Cradle and Valakut, any kind of combo card, or even Cabal Coffers or Urborg. Anything your opponents are doing that is just unfair with their land base is useful for you to destroy, but primarily you're getting rid of Homeward Path. The other lands in the deck, there's just the run-of-the-mill colored ones you want, dual sources. I could probably have better dual lands in here. Somebody who's got the money could be running Underground Sea. I don't even have Watery Grave in here. But, a land card, a dual land card is dual land and EDH, unless you're playing incredibly competitive Magic, it's not going to make or break your deck.
Well, and a rule of thumb that I have for myself, and I'm sure that it's like this for many other players out there, is lands can definitely get expensive, and if you're going to spend maybe $70, $80 on a land card, you might want to put that money towards finishing your deck first before you're going out and just pimping your land base. Even though it might make you feel super cool that you have these really good lands, land cards might want to be the last thing you consider when upgrading your EDH deck.
Unless you're playing Lord Windgrace.
Unless you're playing Lord Windgrace, because then those lands are your deck. So there you have it. That is Randy's Dralnu Lich Lord deck. Again, the link to his tapped out deck will be in the description below if you want to check it out. Maybe build it yourself, tweak it a little bit. And this deck is for the players who want to stop the combos, they want to stop the aggro, they want to take control of the game for themselves by denying resources from their opponents to take it all for themselves, just like our greedy Lich Lord Dralnu himself.